very confused. But a strong argument can be made, of course, that it is precisely what I'm doing that lets the steam out of the pressure cooker, resulting in no more onerous legislation or regulatory involvement by the government. That actually what I'm doing is a rather palliative effort to avoid some of the horribles. Secondly, if Congress decides, let's do something more, some future Congress, I mean, that's democracy. I mean, I trust Richard's erudite substantive arguments in many areas. Richard, as a political bellwether of what Congress may or may not do, thank you very much. I'll stick to my own inclinations and positions. That's the last point. Now, $500,000 is to Richard is an arbitrary cap on compensation that may lead some officials to have to sell a second home, refinance their home, send their kids to public school, and give up the Mercedes. Do not forget that we live in a political economy. I'm not too concerned, based on what I've seen, that people that are now getting $500,000 in base cash are going to give up any of those things. When over the last 5 or 6 years, the top 25 have made 20, 30, 15, 8, 9, $10 million. I wouldn't worry too much that they're not going to be able to send their kid to Exeter or Andover, and they're going to have to go to PS 53. So, I mean, that's just a practical reality, you see. The political consequences of that statute and what we're trying to do. Now, it is interesting, Richard didn't make the point, but he's right, that you better be careful about thinking that one size fits all here, because when you talk about GM or Chrysler Financial, a $500,000 cap does have some significant impact on lifestyle and the ability to spend. And we took that into account in waiving the cap when liquidity or the need for cash does pose the very problem. It's not AIG, Citigroup, and Bank of America that have that problem. They're well off. It is rather some of these other companies where you must make it clear that one size doesn't fit all. For some of these companies where limited cash has consequences, but it's not the companies he's referencing. It's the other companies. And we take that into account. Now he makes another point, which is rather interesting. If I understood him correctly, and he's way ahead of me on this, but if I understood him correctly, it's not a good idea to come up with prescriptions that require, for the most part, a substantial amount of compensation in long-term stock. It promotes excessive risk-taking. Now, I've heard that argument. It may be right. The Federal Reserve tends to agree with Richard for the first time in the last decade. So it may be right. However, the other argument that we get from Lucian and even from Kevin Murphy, be careful. If you want to avoid excessive risk-taking, you better make sure that people don't have guaranteed cash so they have no skin in the game. Now, he aligns it with shareholders. That you get into corporate governance, shareholder say on pay, not on my watch, frankly. Richard knows much more about that than I do. But the question of whether or not cash, as opposed to long-term stock, is better or worse as a promoter of risk is a fascinating problem. We think we did it right, but I must say, Richard makes the argument the other way and says it's much more complicated. It probably is. But I still will stand by my approach, not so much because at the end of the day, substantively, I've got it right. Politically, I've got it right. Politically, I've got it right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Clawback. Well, Richard knows his stuff on clawback. We haven't clawed back. That's discretionary. I have not exercised that discretion. Whether or not I will remains to be seen, but he's absolutely right that if I seek to claw back, don't forget under the law, I have no enforcement authority, just the bully pulpit. I can say to the company, why don't you give it back? But I can't subpoena the records, I can't file a lawsuit, I can't do anything. So, on the clawback, if there's going to be a claim, he's absolutely right. You can't just ask the individual official to give back the money without a hearing, the right to be heard, etc. Now, whether or not the company will give back the money as a surrogate for the individual, that remains to be seen. We haven't clawed back. Again, he's right. He's right. I mean, I have that authority. It's sort of a bully pulpit authority, but it's not a bad, don't knock the bully pulpit authority. It's worked fairly well. Final point in the 5 minutes, 7. Final point. He's right that the statute is problematic when it says, special master, if there is a prior legally binding contract that gives compensation to a named official, and you think that that's excessive under the statute, you may either, you can't terminate the contract, you'd be jumping up and down if I did. That would be absolutely wrong under the rule of law and the Constitution, by the way. Down at the college case, I think Richard teaches. But the law says I can take that amount into consideration in prospective compensation determinations. So I don't ask the official to give the money, to waive his right to $2 million or $1 million. What I say is either roll that money over into stock long term, so you still have a vested interest, your compensation is tied to the future of the company. You may get 3 or 4, 10 times, 30 times more if the stock goes up in value. Do that instead of asking for a check. And if you won't do that, I have the right under the statute to take that amount into account, leverage into account in setting your prospective pay. Now what's happened? In every case but one company, they all rolled the retention contracts over, took stock long-term into the future of the company. Congress loved it. I was satisfied. Treasury said terrific. It was a love-it. AIG said no. We don't trust the stock, so we want our cash. They got the cash. I couldn't deny them their cash. Took it into account in setting their prospective salary, compensation. Whether or not that's the right thing to do or not, I abided completely expressly by the statute in exercising that type of discretion. So that's my 7 minutes. You know, in fairness to Richard, I went from 5 minutes to 7 or 8. Maybe we ought to give him 3 minutes to respond to anything I've said before we throw it over. I waive the rule